Hey everyone, it's Andy Kushner, host of The Wedding Biz, brought to you by Party Slate, our title sponsor, the first website designed specifically for event professionals and venues. And on The Wedding Biz, I conduct in-depth and revealing interviews of icons of the weddings and event industry. And this is all to give you education and inspiration, really for any entrepreneur, but especially those of us in the event industry ourselves. And I want to mention that I would love to hear from you. I would love to know what it is that you're struggling with in your business so I can address it in the interviews. And if there's anyone you'd like me to interview, let me know that as well. But would love to really know what it is that I can help you with. Write me at andy@theweddingbiz.com. Again, andy@theweddingbiz.com. So if you missed last week's episode, it was Allie Barone of Allie Barone Events, a wonderful event designer and planner, and she was one of the stars of the popular TLC series While You Were Out. So check it out if you missed it last week. So this week's interview is of King Dahl, former executive director of event design at MGM Resorts, leading the design and sales teams. King began in the event industry with Cheryl Fish, who is very well known in LA and Las Vegas. King then started his own company, King Dahl Event Design, which he later sold. And then he became executive director of MGM Resorts, eventually responsible for, you ready for this, 1,200 events per year. King's own signature style was large, dramatic productions, and he became an inductee of the Event Solutions Magazine Hall of Fame. And just a few years ago, this is just the wildest part of the story, he left it all to essentially design his dream life, and he talks all about it. This is a great conversation. So enjoy my interview of King Dahl. King, man, I am so thrilled to have you on the show. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks, Andy. I'm really glad to be here. Consider it an honor.
Well, I was thinking back. I remember the very first time we met. We'll see if you remember this, but it was literally like, I know you were in a rush. We were in the hallways of Bellagio. It was the day after I had produced the music and entertainment for the Bellagio's New Year's Eve slot party the night before.
Yeah, sure.
And you were walking by in the hallway. I guess you recognized me because at the time I used to perform too. And you handed me this box of amazing pictures from the show. And I don't know if you remember that. I was almost thinking, geez, is he really allowed to do this? I'm not supposed to have this. And because I'm not supposed to show like the crowd, and there were a lot of crowd shots as well as the performance. But it's like, I was so grateful because those pictures to really a certain degree were a game changer for my career, to be able to show people like the extent of this wild production. I mean, it was because of you handing me those pictures.
Yeah, man. Well, hey, you were a huge part of that entire show. Are you kidding me? And the way I look at it is, you know what? Every big event I do, I love to have it documented either certainly by still photography, and as much as possible by video now as well, because that's really our final documentation, right? That's what we have to show for all our months and months of planning and our months and months of hard work that goes into this. And boom, in 3, 4, 5 hours, it's all gone.
Yeah.
Unless we document it, right?
Right. No, I totally agree with you. And, and then I remember running into you at various conferences. I mean, over years, like we're talking special events, event solutions, all that stuff I'd run into. You were pretty popular, man. People were always gathered around you. So, but I would love to know where King, I mean, look, we're friends too, but I don't have the greatest memory. Where did you grow up?
Well, so I was born actually in a little town in Indiana, Valparaiso, Indiana, northwest corner. It's kind of nowadays almost looked at as a suburb of Chicago, but back then, it's a little town of about, I would say 25,000 back when I was born. And shortly after that, my family and I moved to Florida, to Coco Beach. Remember the years of I Dream of Jeannie and all that?
Oh, yeah, I remember. I admit
right?
That. Yeah,
we moved down there right at the height of that. My father actually was the state's youngest bank president at the time, and he ended up being the president of First National of Cape Canaveral, right there in right where all the where the Space Center was, and all that activity was happening there.
So you saw a lot of the rockets take off?
From my backyard, man. From my backyard. We would stand there and watch Apollo take off.
Oh,
yeah.
No.
Mind-blowing of an experience.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and I know that, I mean, we're going to get further into it in a minute. Obviously, music was a huge passion. What was it music from the start? I mean, like, when did that, because I know, events happen later. We'll get to your story in a second, but
Sure.
Was it the music that hit you big in the beginning? How young were you when you started getting into that?
Well, actually very young. So my father, and you'd enjoy this, my father was a trumpet player. Actually quite a good one.
Well, it's the best instrument, obviously.
Right.
Obviously.
But you're not biased. And he played with the likes of Sarah Vaughan. I remember a story. Remember that comedian George Gobel? There was a story he played with him. Yeah. So he was a trumpeter, and but primarily played things like the Elks Club in Indiana and those things. Well, as he continued his musical career and he ended up marrying my mother, he got into banking. And that's how he became the youngest bank president in the Florida history at the time. And so he really became a very successful businessman, but the trumpet was always there. And as I was a young boy, and my older brother, who incidentally, and you know him, my older brother, Curtis Dahl, is a very, very well-known wedding photographer in LA. Yeah. And has been for decades. Anyway, he and my father, him having 7 years on me, would play duos, my father on trumpet, my brother on the piano, and they'd hand me a set of maracas, or they'd hand me a tambourine. Here, come on, jam with us. And so I would play along and kind of started absorbing these things, not knowing that we were really playing jazz tunes, but a lot of them were also the big hits of the day, the Burt Bacharach, tunes like that. And Do You Know the Way to San Jose? Sure. Things like that.
Standards,
right? Yeah. And I started just falling in love with that stuff and ended up taking piano lessons as a young child too. So the whole music thing was a big part of my growing up. And it wasn't necessarily that it was, hey, let's all become musicians, but let's understand the importance of what music can do in your life and how it can help shape some of the other aspects that you do throughout your life and your career. And that's kind of how I've always looked at it.
But like what, for example? Like what would be some of the big ways? Because again, I know that this had, really huge impact on what you ended up doing with events. So how did you see that music had such an effect?
Well, think about creativity in general, okay? And how many musicians are not only musicians, but are artists. Miles Davis is a good example, right? He's known so well for his music and what he's done to jazz and how he's shaped jazz and changed music over the course of his lifetime. And but he's also an excellent painter, so creativity tends to run in along those lines.
That's true. Yes.
Right?
It is interesting how there's a lot of musicians. It's not just the music. If you're creative and in business too, right? I mean, those of us who are so creative in business are capable of doing many different things, really.
Right. And you'd be surprised at how many Fortune 500 CEOs in that actually have a musical background.
Yes.
Right? Or you even look at, the likes of Bill Clinton, he was a tenor sax player, right? I mean, there's all kinds of them. The list is endless. So that was kind of always I think that foundation, that's why I'm so pro music in school too, because I think that foundation is so important, but not necessarily to try and encourage everybody to become musicians. There's, obviously there's not enough room for that. Music is, to be really the cream of the crop. There's a small section of the population that truly, truly make it in huge ways in music. And then others have done much like yourselves as well. They're great musicians, but have also learned how to make a business out of music and turn that passion for creativity and that passion for business, fuse it together and become an entertainment provider and entertainment designer that, goes on to help cement the celebrations of all kinds of people in their memories, right?
So when was it that I know that you ran into a legend of the industry, really an icon, Cheryl Fish.
Oh, yeah.
So now, because isn't that the start of like basically what happened? Wasn't that the first thing that happened that started to take you? I know you were still playing bass, but that's when you started to get into events and started to see that world. Was it with Cheryl?
It most certainly was. So what had happened after going to music school, I went to Berklee College of Music. I got a call for a gig on the cruise ships out of Miami Beach and cruising the Bahamas. So I took that gig as a bassist, and it was a fun time. It was great for a young man at 21. We had just a great time. But I got off that ship several months later, stone broke. Didn't save a dime,
okay.
And it was just I was immature and just did not save my money. Called up my mother from Miami and said, Mom, I'm off the ships now, and you're not going to like what I have to ask, but can you lend me some money so I can fly back to Boston? Well, she was clearly not real happy with my predicament, knowing I should have certainly gotten off this gig with plenty of money to live for a while. And she said, you know what? Your brother, along with a couple partners, including Cheryl Fish, have just started a company in California. And I said, well, really, what kind of company? And she said, well, they're party planners, party designers. And I'm like, party designers? What are you talking about? And she said, well, I can't completely describe what they do, but apparently there are people in LA that spend big money on parties and they design the decor. And one thing we hadn't touched on, Andy, was throughout my grade school and high school years, I was also an artist. So, constantly drawing, constantly doodling, constantly, crafting things. And so I called my brother and he said, hey, what if I came out to LA, talked you into a job? I understand you guys make props. You might make things for parties. Maybe I could help do some of that as my, dare I say it, my day gig, right, Andy?
Right.
Musicians have day jobs.
Listen, IBM was my day job for a long time while I was building my band business. But keep going. Yep.
Yeah, same kind of thing. And he said, well, you know what? Let me talk to my partners, talk to Cheryl. They were a little bit apprehensive about it at first, like, oh, now, come on, Kurt, what do we need to bring your brother out? How do we know he's going to really be able to carry his weight? And my brother went to bat for me and said, you just got to trust me on this one. The guy has some talent, and he'll be fine getting in here and building our props. And that's what I did. I took off to California, started up with them, making a whopping $4 an hour in 1982.
I was going to say, this is back in 82. Okay.
Yeah, back in 82. And that's when I met Cheryl Fish. And Andy, I cannot say enough about the warmth and the encouragement and the open arms that I was welcomed with by Cheryl, her partners at the time, my brother Curtis, and their other partner, Howard Case, who was also a very well-respected photographer in town. And they had started this company. I joined with them, and now it was basically me and a couple other ragtag high schoolers, at that time in the shop building the props. And that's kind of happened.
Is that the company? It's the Main Event?
It's the Main Event. You're exactly right.
And for the sake of everyone listening, can you, not to skip too forward, but just to kind of briefly explain who Cheryl Fish is for those who don't know?
Oh, absolutely. Cheryl Fish, back in the early 80s, and of course, they had started this company a couple of years prior to me getting there. There really wasn't an industry as we know it today. Of course, technology has changed things. Everything has changed. But there were a small handful of people in some of the largest cities, New York, LA, Chicago, I would have to assume Orlando, that were doing really neat cutting edge events of the time. Well, our basic clientele was the high-end bar mitzvah market and the high-end wedding market. We weren't doing a lot of corporate events back then. It was more the social and the Hollywood celebrities as well. And that's kind of how we started to develop a voice, a voice of what our events would look like. Our goal was always to produce events that you walked into the room and not be able to recognize right away who necessarily designed that event, but to have it be so fabulous that you'd walk away going, I should have known that's Cheryl Fish and it's the Main Event. And that was kind of our goal. And she instilled that into me. And to this day, I try and approach design and creativity from the standpoint of being unique, being cutting edge, being innovative, but having a voice that makes people understand that, I should know better. That's a King Dahl event. Yeah.
Well, so then it was just to stay on the trajectory here for a little bit. I believe, wasn't it 10 years later that Cheryl sold her company and took over events was it Mirage? And then you started your own company at that same time? Is that because I know the big thing about Cheryl is that Steve Wynn got a hold of her at some point, and that's when everything changed in Vegas, when Cheryl Fish, from what I know, took over events and really defined what that is as special event divisions of companies in Vegas.
Right. It's no exaggeration to say Cheryl was really a key player in the events industry in the 80s in LA, which ultimately ended up, because of her involvement in things like the conventions you mentioned earlier, the special event, and et cetera, her influence was quite large at the time. Well, it's no exaggeration to say she did the same thing in Las Vegas. But what had happened is in the late 80s, I realized, you know what? After working several years in the event industry, I wondered, is there more for me? Is there more out there for me? And I made the bold decision to get out of the industry for a few years and explore some other things. I got into real estate and did some different things. The real estate market was very hot at that time in California. And during that time, it just so happened that I would get calls from some of the venues I had worked at, and they would ask me, hey, would you consider doing an event here? Well, I don't really do that anymore, but I would do events for the real estate industry. Well, shortly after, I was approached by the people at the Malibu Conference Center and the Calamigos Ranch, and they said to me, hey, King, we've got an idea. We've always loved the events you've done up here. What if we give you a space to work? We give you unlimited access to all of our leads, all of our corporate picnics, all of our wedding clients, all of our conference customers. Anybody that comes in here and needs an event, you've got access to. All you have to do is upsell them on the fact that you do those designs. What do you think about that? We'll split everything right down the middle. And I thought, wow, Jeez. It seems like how could you go wrong with that type of an arrangement? I signed on the bottom line. It worked wonderfully for a number of years. Well, at the same time, just a few years later, Cheryl Fish ended up striking a very remarkably similar deal with Steve Wynn. Steve Wynn approached Cheryl.
Of Bellagio at the time.
Of Mirage and Treasure Island.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. And she had gone up and done a few New Year's events and some of the big events that they throw for their casino customers out of her LA-based business. And her and Steve struck a deal and set up very similar in the way that I had at the Malibu Conference Center. And Steve and Cheryl struck a deal where Steve supplied studio, allowed her to outfit it with the necessary tools, the infrastructure needed, basically gave her the pocketbook in order to build a business in Vegas that was owned by the Mirage Resorts at the time. And the company was called Mirage Events. And they did events at Steve Wynn's two properties, the Mirage, Treasure Island. Shortly after, he opens the Bellagio. Naturally, Cheryl did the grand opening to just a huge fanfare. Some of her most brilliant work was those early years of Bellagio. And that's kind of how that all happened in the Vegas arrangement. Now, fast forward a couple of years later, MGM steps into the deal and buys Mirage Resorts.
Yes.
It becomes MGM Mirage Resorts, adding not only Bellagio, Treasure Island, and Mirage, but the MGM properties, which included MGM Grand and some other associated properties, the Boardwalk, which is no longer there, and the Monte Carlo, that kind of thing. So that happened. And the company just kind of kept growing and growing while the events division was still in full swing. And as we strictly did events just at the properties that our corporation owned, which now ballooned to 5, right? And soon after that, we bought the Mandalay Bay Resorts Group, which included Mandalay Bay, the Luxor, Excalibur. And now, again, our property portfolio in Las Vegas started to grow and grow and grow, as did the events division. Little while later, they announced the building of City Center, which added Aria, Vidara, the Mandarin Oriental at the time, the Crystal Shopping Mall. So now there's 11 or so properties on the Strip that we're doing events at. And the company is just flourishing and doing wonderfully. And we're doing some of the most creative and innovative work any of us had ever done. It was just an amazing time to be in the event industry.
Well, and to explain to people, you became, you had your own company for a period of time, right? Then you sold it. And then in 92, 2003, isn't that when you became executive director of event design at MGM Resorts?
Well, so what happened was Cheryl started to realize and was thinking ahead as leaders do, right? And trying to put a succession plan into place. And she realized, you know what? She really needed somebody within the company that once it came time for her to retire, who's going to take the reins of that company at that point? And I'd been watching her work. She had been watching mine. We kind of keep an eye, obviously always been in contact, would see each other at the same conventions and keep up on each other's work. Well, she approached me and said, hey, what do you think of this idea? Basically, you up and sell King Dahl Event Design, you move to Las Vegas, which means moving my entire family, and be my number two, essentially, at Mirage Resorts, or at least run, I shouldn't say number two, but run the sales division and the creative division. Okay. Yeah. And I thought, what a wonderful opportunity. Well, that happened to happen right after 9/11 too, when the whole 9/11 issue devastated the event industry, rightfully so. People weren't in the mood to spend big money on parties and having fun after the devastation that just happened to our country. And it took a couple of years to recover from that industry wide. I'm sure you remember it as well.
Sure.
Yeah. And a lot of us were reeling at that time. Well, this was a welcome, dare I call it a lifeline that said, you know what, if you can sell your company, I was successful in doing that, and move up to Las Vegas, we've got a deal. And I was some of the employees that were so instrumental in helping me build my own company, King Dahl Event Design, stepped in and said, we would love to build the company and buy that from you and kind of continue on. I never thought, Andy, between you and I, that it would still be called King Dahl Event Design, but apparently there's some goodwill with the name. But it is here 15 years, however long later. Right. Yeah, it's still called that. And it's odd for me to drive around town and see trucks, in LA, drive by with my name on it. But
that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of how that all worked out. And it just worked out wonderfully.
I want to really dig into this now, the business of it. Now, somewhere I read that you said, I believe in 100% collaboration with my team, whether in the studio or with my creative partners from all disciplines of event production. I speak to groups throughout the world on building a high-performing event team, and I live by the principles of empowerment and collaboration. I never design totally alone.
Right.
And King, I want to hear what you have to say about it, but I know back from when I was doing all these New Year's jobs in Vegas, and I would meet sometimes with your team and I'd see various people, you were so highly respected, not all that typical in a corporate kind of an environment. And I would say it's because of this, right? It's your philosophy of collaboration and how much you really empowered them.
Well, that's really nice of you to say, Andy, and I appreciate that. But really, that does come from my heart. This is where really the music starts to play a big important role in how I approach the business. And I look at, let's bring up Miles Davis again. If you think about Miles Davis, the jazz superstar that he is and how he's changed music several times. Well, he didn't do that alone. He did that by surrounding himself with the best possible musicians he could find at any given time. And those musicians that brought something fresh to the table, right? Fresh to the band. And he did that a number of times. Well, when those musicians joined the band, Miles didn't say, okay, I want you to play like this, and I want you to play like this, and I want you to do this. No, he said, do your thing. I'm stepping out of the way. And that's exactly how I like to approach the event business as well. Now, of course, there's a strong foundation. There's a strong plan. There's months of planning on some of these events, and things are dialed in many regards, with military precision. However, I like to leave a lot of room for what you might term in the jazz world as soloing, right? Something where the people doing the building or the installing are able to stretch out and bring their own voice to the project. And I'll be honest, Andy, I'm never let down. I love it when people can execute something. I may have had the vision of a particular treatment, but when you let go and allow others to bring what their life experiences into that project and create within that framework, it's always beyond my expectations. And that's really how you generate these incredible events, is by creating an environment or a culture that really stresses and amplifies the ability of the players, right? You always want to have individual performance that is extraordinary, but those individual performers need to also work well as a group. And that's what really you need to depend on your leader for, is to how can that leader help everybody else play better or perform better.
But how, I mean, with such a large team and such an incredible level, I mean, of course, there's smaller events, but there's also, I mean, Vegas, MGM, I mean, some outrageously complicated.
Crazy.
Yeah. And I know you are known for your own signature, very large, dramatic productions. How do you manage a team like that? How did you set this up as a manager? And where the hell did you learn how to manage in this sense too?
Well, you've got to start compartmentalizing to an extent, okay? Think of a big band. Well, every big band has, right, a lead trumpeter. There's somebody in charge of the sax section. You've got to start breaking things down. And that's how I've always done it. I work with the team leaders or the, department heads of the various different disciplines that are involved. Work with the lighting designer directly. Work with the head of catering directly. Work with the head of staging directly. And then also our decor teams. We've got a graphics team. We've got a prop fabrication team. We've got logistics personnel. We've got warehouse personnel. We've got a wood shop. All those have leaders. And those department leaders are who you really need to focus in on. And then they take that information and disseminate it down to their people. Hopefully, if you've empowered them properly and inspired them properly, they take that same vibe that you're giving. Look, don't go tell people what to do. Go ask them how they would do it. And then you extract what works and what might not work, and you tweak and you modify. And that's how you build these great final products.
It's so interesting in my band business. I've done some huge productions.
I know,
in addition. Yeah. And it's interesting. I used to be so controlling. I mean, so much responsibility on your shoulders, on my shoulders. I was very controlling, working like crazy. And ultimately, people working for me then are not necessarily going to be as happy. It was so much later in my career and life that I figured out what you're talking about, which is pick some key people. And there were always key people, but I didn't empower them enough. And it was taking these key people, choosing them carefully, and then, like you say, empowering them, delegating and trusting, just like raising our kids, we've got to let them fall on their faces to really learn the lessons. So that was what was hard for me, but in the end, enabled me to be more successful and have happier employees.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And we don't all find, and there are more than one ways to skin a cat as well. There are some amazing designers that are exceptionally controlling, and they're ones that I get just a ton of inspiration from. But for me personally, the way I like to do it and the way I've always approached life because of this early jazz training was by that collaboration. The similarities of jazz and creativity in events are numerous. You think about it. In jazz, the band leader chooses the music, right? Well, in events, the event producer, the executive producer, kind of chooses the theme, chooses the overall look of the event, right? Well, a band leader then goes out and finds the right musicians to put in that band, the musicians that are going to be able to play this music the way it really ought to be played and bring their own voice to it. Same in events. You go out and you get the right artists, you get the right talent, you get the right designers that can execute that vision, again, bringing their own voice. And hopefully that leader, just like a band leader, draws out the best in those players or the best of those artists.
And to add to that, also choosing people where it's almost like a chemistry thing, where the chemistry between them, like they say, it's not just the cliche, two heads are better than one, but literally figuring out the abilities, the passion, and all of this, and combining them for this explosive end result, right? As a team.
That's exactly right.
Well, and also, we talk about reinventing. I think you said something a little earlier. I believe weren't your role models? Also Miles Davis for me too, and also Pablo Picasso. And I believe you had spoken about how they're always looking forward, never back, as far as reinventing. Those are legends. Pablo Picasso, Miles Davis.
Right.
Like you say, it can definitely roll over into business. What would you say about reinventing yourself in business?
And that's actually exactly right. And we needed to do that with MGM Resorts Event Productions as well. You had to reinvent because, again, what got you to 300 events doesn't get you to 750 and certainly doesn't get you to 1,200. You have to reinvent the model, and you have to be very aware of what's happening, what external forces are at play, what new technologies are coming in, how is the industry changing, what's, what, outside of yourself, what have others done to change the industry that you need to be aware of and keep up with, or, use as inspiration to take your own work to a new level. It's all those things play a part in that approach to really doing some spectacular work.
Can you tell me something, King, about your general process? Again, I know with MGM, the range of what you did was just, hugely big, but are you able to, kind of narrow down a general process on how you handled events, basically?
Well, it all really starts with understanding where the client is coming from and understanding what the purpose of the event. And if there's a message that the client wants to send to those that are attending the event. Now, I do a lot more in terms of, personally, the large events or the beautifully decorated events, and less maybe of some of that corporate messaging that is out there, which I wholeheartedly respect. But my particular niche has been, some of those just really wow types of events. But that really makes it important that you understand the reason for this event and who are the attendees and what do they really want out of this. Design is subjective. What I may think is great, you may think is mediocre. What you think is great, I may think is, that maybe we should do it this way. That doesn't matter. What matters is what really the client is looking for, and to understand where they're coming from, and to hopefully put your finger on the pulse of where their brand is, where their what their thought process is, and what message they're trying to convey to their customers. Well, on the casino level, when you work for MGM Resorts, each brand has a specific look. MGM Grand is different than Bellagio. Bellagio is different than Aria. Aria is different than the Mirage. Each one has its own unique, message that they're trying to give to their customers, right? Some it's the ultimate in opulence and beauty and the five diamond experience like a Bellagio. Some may be more of a, MGM bills itself as the city of entertainment, that kind of thing. So you need to understand what makes that particular client, let's call them clients, tick and design the events appropriately. That's the first thing. And that can happen whether it's a New Year's event, whether it might be a slot tournament, that are geared towards their slot customers. Well, slot customers in a casino are different than baccarat customers. They're just a different level of person. And you need to design appropriately for what works well. That's why back in the day, we would do a separate slot New Year's party as well as what we would call an international party, which were primarily for our international guests from the Far East for the most part.
Yeah.
And they were different events, both, designed to really work well for that particular attendee.
Yes. Can you give a story of one of your favorite events that really illustrates what we're talking about?
Oh, man. Yeah.
I know you got a ton.
There are a lot of them.
Maybe a real favorite that really moved you, that you just loved.
Well, yeah, I will give you that. I have been fortunate enough to do many reoccurring events that happen year after year after year. One of my favorites is for an organization called Keep Memory Alive. And the Keep Memory Alive Foundation raises money for Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and those diseases of the brain. And long ago, I did my first event for them where it was a fundraising event, but it was always one of the premier fundraisers, if not the premier fundraiser in Las Vegas. And they would raise literally millions on a single night. And their campaigns, the year-long campaigns, would be, 20 million plus. Just an amazing group of people. But as that foundation continued to grow, we got to the point where we were now holding these events in MGM Grand Garden Arena, which is basically the same place, you'd go see Aerosmith or you'd go see, whoever you might see.
Jeez.
It's a big concert venue as well.
Huge.
It's a big, huge. And we would hold these events on the floor, of course, of the arena for 1,800 people, give or take. And as the event grew and kind of the stature of the event grew, and it got the who's who of Las Vegas and beyond, but primarily of Las Vegas to attend these events. And again, like I say, Andy, they'd raise millions of dollars. They got wise one year and brought on an entertainment company called DPS. Dan Parisi's amazing entertainment provider. And Dan had the ability to bring on the likes of basically any star you'd want. And we had everybody from, Snoop Dogg and LL Cool J to Bono to everybody.
Jeez.
Well, we did an event for Quincy Jones's 80th birthday. He was being
You did that?
honored.
I heard about this.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God.
So Quincy turned 80. The foundation wanted to honor him. At the same time, Michael Caine, Michael Caine, Sir Michael Caine, the actor.
Yes.
Who would have known this? I certainly didn't, but they are very good friends, he and Quincy, also turned 80. So we did kind of a double birthday for both those gentlemen. Well, Quincy is, all you have to do is say, hey, this is Quincy's 80th birthday, and every big-time musician is saying, just tell me when to be there, and I'm there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's when we got the likes of Bono to show up and sing Fly Me to the Moon with a full orchestra on stage.
God.
Again, Snoop Dogg, everybody. But one of my favorite parts, being the jazz musician, and you'll love this too. One point, so it was like the Grammys. This was like producing the Grammys now. So these stars would come out and do one or two tunes, the biggest names. And all of a sudden on stage, who walks out but Herbie Hancock?
Wow.
Right? The amazing piano player from the Miles Davis groups in the 60s. Carlos Santana on guitar.
Yeah.
This is amazing. Marcus Miller, Vinnie Colaiuta.
On bass.
Yeah, on bass, yeah. And that's the group, these jazz superstars. And what do they play? Quincy Jones's Killer Joe.
Oh, come on.
How cool is that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was just, at that point, the fusion of my love of jazz and my love of events felt very complete. It was just like an awesome moment for me. And you'll appreciate this, and any of your listeners as well, Andy, who love jazz. As I'm setting up the event, there was a period where basically everybody went on break, and we're the day before, and a few of the musicians would come in, just do a little sound check. Well, I'm roaming around virtually alone, except for the sound guy, in the arena. On stage is Carlos Santana by himself, just working on his sound, just trying to get his sound going. Wants to make sure, he's a perfectionist. What's he launch into? But Coltrane's A Love Supreme.
Oh, my God.
Solo electric guitar.
Yeah.
Carlos Santana style. In this arena, a private concert just for me. It was like, I couldn't even believe it.
I think there's a video of that out on YouTube of him playing that. I think.
Are you kidding?
No, I think. Anyway,
wow.
Yeah.
There shouldn't be.
Yeah, right. I know. Well,
because the arena was on lockdown, but yeah. So that was a special moment in my life. But to do those annual events year after year, it was just amazing. We had the likes of, Chris Cornell. We did events honoring Muhammad Ali, Tony Bennett, just really, really super.
Well, we've got to go in a direction here that shocked the industry, at least in Las Vegas, had reverberations elsewhere in the event industry when you seemingly to the public left. You've got and moved. You and your wife Stacy moved to Bellingham, Washington, and left the event business and took off for like a few years traveling. You have to tell us about that. I mean,
well, Andy, we're all made up. We're all complex creatures, right? We're made up far more things than maybe some of even our closest friends are aware of. Well, apparently. I was known, right? I was known very well as an event producer and enjoyed that reputation, and it's great. Well, the people in jazz still look at me as a jazz bassist, whether or not I performed professionally for 30 years or not. And so it's that kind of thing. I have a lot of aspects to my personality, but the events definitely dominated my life for about 35 years. So 35 years, I had a run of producing events and working very hard as a result. And those in the event industry know all too well what I'm talking about, but things never really get easier because the industry constantly changes. You need to change. The events only get bigger and more spectacular. Certainly, nobody's looking to, how can I downsize my business and make it easier for me? Right. No, things just get more and more, they can take a lot of energy out of you, right? Well, I realized at one point that as my kids were now, my wife and I were becoming empty nesters, and my kids were in college or out of college, and that it was to the point where, maybe it's time to set some of this behind us, relax for a little bit, enjoy our other personalities, which is an extraordinary love of nature, an extraordinary love of travel. My wife being an environmental educator, she understands the importance of instilling a love of the natural world into children. And she has instilled that into me, as a matter of fact, as well. And as you've come out and visited a couple of times, we love to just go out and be in the woods, right? And I love that aspect, but it's not really, I wanted to get my life to the point where I wasn't working 48 or 50 weeks a year in order that I could take 2 to 4 weeks off and do whatever I wanted. I wanted to somehow figure out, is there a way you could flip that? Is there a way I could do what I want for 11 months a year and maybe make enough money out of that in a smaller period of time if I downsize things, if I get away from the fact that I'm trying to accumulate and get more stuff? I understand for me personally, no longer was anything about stuff, was anything about nice cars and nice houses and this and that. There were other things more important to me that didn't require money. And that's how it allowed me to make that decision to say, you know what? I'm looking to retire out of the day-to-day operation of events. And I didn't ever want to burn a bridge. I didn't ever want to say, you know what, I'm done. It's all up to you guys from here on out. I just wanted to throttle myself back out, allow the next generation to really come in and put their mark on things. And especially at MGM, there's a lot of great talent in that building. And while, yes, I may have been there to help lead and help inspire and help drive the company creatively, there's so much talent there. I really felt it was time to allow them to exert their voices without my influence and let them flourish that way. And we fell in love with the Northwest, moved up to Washington State, and and that's kind of how we've done it.
If I can back up though, all right. So essentially, you did feel because apparently 35 years, you're in your 50s, which
it's a long time, right?
But it's a long time, but it's still relatively young. You're feeling basically burnt out. Now, that's not a negative thing about the industry, but you were feeling kind of burnt, right? Just needed to get to nature.
Yeah, burnt out might be one way of
Is that too heavy-handed of a phrase?
Yeah, because all my burning out is self-inflicted. So,
right.
Yeah.
Right. It is can I just say that? I was listening to a podcast interview recently, and whoever it was saying that, when we say that we're overwhelmed, that we're feeling overwhelmed, no, we are making ourselves overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So like the burnout, right. We're making ourselves burnt out. Burned out.
It's easier to do than you ever want to admit, and me being somewhat of a driver in that, I don't know, maybe I'm type A personality, whatever it might be. But, I really was never one to rest on my laurels. The next year, whatever events I'm doing the following year, I want to be better than the year I just completed. It's not enough for me to continue the status quo any more than it was enough for Pablo Picasso to paint the same things over and over, right?
Striving and reinventing and
the
all
reinventing,
that.
Yeah. And so it got to the point where, you know what? Even on a personal level, reinventing oneself can be a great thing.
Yes.
And it doesn't necessarily, while it may have disappointed some, or it may have, as you say, put a little shockwave in the event industry, it was time for me personally to say, hey, let's explore other things for now. And believe it or not, Andy, I'm back playing, which is awesome. And, it's just
bass.
great. It's great to have that time.
What about fear? I'm just putting myself in your shoes. And sure, I fantasize about this kind of thing. I think everyone on the podcast knows, where I got my inspiration for this show was taking 5 weeks off a few years ago and going to Maui.
Yes.
And, and I did it again, but it was that first 5 weeks of completely disconnecting. Now you're talking more than 5 weeks. You're talking a few years, and in a minute, we'll get to what you're doing today. But what about, was there, I was afraid of going for 5 weeks. It ended up being, life-changing for me.
Sure.
But what about you? What about, was there a fear? Did you feel fear?
I approached it the exact same way as I approached the business when myself and Lynn Ann transformed the business a number of times. And one of those ways is by developing a strategic plan. And I really got right down into the nuts and bolts of, okay, if I want to take a couple of years off, I'm in no position to just say, oh, I'm not going to work for 2 years. How am I going to support myself and my family? There has to be a plan. But within that plan, there has to be enough room to improvise and to adapt as things that I couldn't possibly conceive of happening, may happen. So I've got to be ready for that. So what my wife and I did, and we really developed a strategic plan that allowed us to say, okay, this is what we're looking to do. This is why we're looking to do it. And this is how we're going to do it. And step by step. And in order to do that, I was able to get myself into a position of being entirely debt free. So I don't have the fear of needing to pay a stack of bills anymore, And I was able to save enough money to really carry us for those first couple of years by really planning and figuring out it ahead of time. So that's the way I did it.
Right. It's not like you did this overnight. You planned this you thought about it for a while, but you planned it for a couple of years, something like that.
Truth be told, about 3 or 4 years.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. But it's just like getting up on the bandstand. The reason I don't get afraid, and it drives my wife crazy too sometimes, she says, well, how can you possibly do that? You've never done that kind of thing before. And well, every time I get up on a stage and I'm going to play a jazz gig, I've never played this song the same way. Right. I've never played this song before. I've never played with these guys before. But here we are in front of an audience, and we're going to expose ourselves. We might as well be up there playing naked because we're exposing ourselves to an audience having never. Sometimes I play with guys I've met for the first time that night. But that's where that trust of understanding what jazz is, understanding how you improvise, not only in music, but in daily life. Yeah. And that's what kind of erases my fear. That's how I'm able to conquer that.
Well, then, so what was it like? Well, first of all, what was that first morning like when you woke up and the first time after you left your end date? And then what was it like to go travel and be off for a while?
Well, So it's crazy. So my end date was midnight, December 31st, 2015. Okay. So I woke up January 1st, 2016. The
whole world celebrated.
Unemployed. Yeah.
Okay. Right.
Yeah. So what I didn't anticipate, so I had this one last New Year's event to do. It was really probably one of my best. I loved it. It was fabulous. And, you know, the entire team knew this was my last event. It was just the camaraderie, the collaboration, as you say, all of that was just all pistons were firing, and it was an awesome event. And I wanted to go out on top that way, you know, go out while I was still relevant. I wake up January 1st. I'm in a hotel in Vegas because, you know, I just worked all night, and I'm still kind of in work mode. I pick up my phone. What do? The first thing I'm going to do is check my email, of course, right? Don't you practically every morning, you know, you pick up your phone. Let's see who needs me.
Try not to.
My email's
nothing.
Cut off.
Oh,
12:01, no email. I'm done. And at that point, I realized, oh, wow. Okay. Well, I wasn't quite ready for just, you know, someone taking a pair of scissors to the cord and cut, you know, you're done. But after the first initial shock over the first few minutes, I realized, wow, I've never felt this light. I feel like I'm walking on air. And now, really, whatever happens from this point on is just, it's whatever I want to make happen. I have the power to now do and really live in whatever manner I choose, along with my wife, of course. And it was the most freeing, liberating thing I'd ever felt. Now, in the back of my mind, Andy, too, just so you know, and again, to alleviate that fear, I know I'm good financially for a couple of years. And I also know I've never burnt a bridge in my entire life in my industry. It wouldn't take more than a couple of phone calls and I'm back working again. You know, I could work with a wide variety of people.
You had that. Yeah.
Yeah. So if, you know, things go awry, something tragic happens, I'm going to work again. I'm not worried about that. And so that's what allowed us to just load up the car, put the camping equipment in, and take off for weeks at a time. My wife and I did an 8-week excursion across the entire United States our first year. Came back, and then the following year we did a 10-week excursion across Canada in the United States, came back for a little while, and then went to Alaska for a number of weeks. It was just, just incredible.
How have you changed from that experience?
Well, hopefully all in a positive way, but what it's really allowed me to understand was what our country really is all about. I started to realize the beauty of our country because we took mostly non-interstate roads because that's, you know, just lined with gas stations and mini marts and Denny's and fast food restaurants. I didn't want that experience of America. We really wanted to dive into what America really is. So we took mostly 2-lane highways throughout and camped in. We had our dog with us, camped in state parks, national parks, wherever it made sense. And we, of course, would plot our routes. But it was then that I really started to realize what the country was all about and the positive aspects. Our news feeds are so filled with such junk these days. Right. And, you know, there is so much good about it. And I don't mean to sound Pollyanna or have rose-colored glasses on, but it did open my eyes to what an amazing place this is and what an amazing place North America really is. And I include Canada in that because, wow, I was just blown away at the wonderful people, how nice everybody is, and just the beauty that's, you know, right north of us. And that's, I think, what drew my wife and I up to the Pacific Northwest was that proximity to Canada.
So then after 2 or 3 years of this, you want to explain what you did next? You kind of started to dip your toes back in?
Yeah, it's exactly right. So knowing full well and right according to plan, about 2 years in, 2 years and a couple months, I figured, you know what, now's the time to start to look around. Now, it doesn't necessarily need to be event related, but events is certainly something, again, I can just do with the snap of my fingers and I'm back in. And, but I explored a couple of different things. One of them was position at the port of Anacortes, which would have kind of explored some event elements, but more working within the venues and that kind of thing. But at that, literally, Andy, within days of me even convincing myself it was now time to return to work on some type of basis, whether it be freelance, whatever it is, I got a call from MGM Resorts Events saying, hey, King, would you consider, and it's okay to say no, but would you consider coming back to us on a freelance basis and produce just certain events with us throughout the year? Just like you always did. We've got the team in place, but you would lead and you would spearhead a New Year's event, maybe a Chinese New Year event, these certain ones. And I thought, wow, well, this timing couldn't be any better. Yeah. And I love those people. They're my people, you know? Yeah. And I said, absolutely. Are you kidding? And got involved with them. And so for the last couple of years, I've been actively involved in other events in Las Vegas, as well as spreading my wings in some other just wonderful events throughout the country. One notable one was almost in my own backyard in Seattle, when I got a call from Kevin White from XPL, who said he's from back east in Boston, and said, hey, I'm producing the Special Olympics, and that's the Shriver's Special Olympics. That's right. In Seattle. And the opening ceremony, I'd love you to bring you on board to get involved with that. And how wonderful of an experience is that? So now I can pick and choose truly what events I want to do. I'm no longer beholden to needing to make a certain amount of money because, as a freelancer, I do fine. I do quite well.
Well, sure. A consulting fee, how ironic, right? You're probably getting more certainly more for.
Yeah, but we don't say that.
Well, no, more per hour. I mean, more per hour. Yeah, and then, but also you're also having time off, right? Aren't you working, taking off, working, taking off, working? Isn't that what you're doing?
It allows me to explore the various aspects of my life. So it's not just 100% events all the time. The events are a big part of what I do, but then it also allows me to continue to explore jazz and play again, which, takes time. You need to be available to do gigs. You need to be around. And it's allowing me to do that, which is just a true love of my life. I'm also have developed an interest in fine woodworking. Now, being a prop builder since the beginning of my event career, I was always building props, but most of those props really just had to last for, the 4-hour extent of the party. And now I'm learning to build fine furniture and that kind of thing. And I've gotten involved in a woodworkers association here in the Northwest. So I've got these three aspects of my personality, as well as allowing myself to live where it just feels so right for us in the middle of the beautiful Northwest, right in the middle of nature.
Yeah. You get to stay there. Yeah. It's really, I tell you, King, it's really inspiring, what you've done takes a huge amount of courage. I mean, maybe to you it wasn't, but, to us in the outside world, or to anyone who does something like, who's thinking about that, it does take courage to do it. You did it.
It does.
You've come back better than ever. I mean, it's really a great story, and I really appreciate you sharing it with us.
Oh, man, it's my pleasure.
What is the best way for people to now find out about you currently and to reach you?
Well, I'm available, of course, on all social media sites, and you can certainly hit my Instagram account up at King Dahl Creative, which shows most of my woodworking and some of the event work I do. And that's probably the best way. And of course, Facebook's always there too.
Great. And do you have a website, or is it just the social media?
I do have a website, and it's under construction, but it's strictly for the woodworking, and it's kingdahlcreative.com.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, man, what a great time catching up, and we are overdue to get together. So I'm coming out to your part of the world.
All right,
I'm coming out there again. Man. I love that area of Bellingham. It's beautiful.
The canoe is waiting for you.
Oh, I'm ready. Well, man, thanks so much.
Andy, it's my pleasure. It truly is. I really appreciate you having me on, and it's always fun to talk with you, man.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to my interview of King Dahl. Wasn't that something else? Well, he doesn't have a website, but he does have social media. On Instagram and Facebook, you'll find him at King Dahl Creative. That's King Dahl, Dahl Creative, King Dahl Creative. Of course, it is going to be in the show notes. If you miss it, you can catch it there at our website at theweddingbiz.com. please share this episode with friends and colleagues to help people find us. And if you give us a great review on iTunes, that also will really help the show quite a bit. So don't forget to listen to our follow-on segment with every interview, The Next Level, which comes out on Wednesdays, in which I have a guest co-host. And together we tease out some of the highlights of the interview and help deliver them as specific tactics and tips to help you raise your own business to the next level. And this week's guest co-host is going to be Phil Van Nostrand, who was on the show before. Wonderful photographer. Phil has his own story about really just essentially designing his life the way he wants it to be. And I've got a big announcement for next week. Next week's interview is going to be of Marcy Bloom. That's right, Marcy Bloom. Great interview. So be sure to check in with us next week and follow us on Instagram at The Wedding Biz. And we want to thank our sponsor, which is Kushner Entertainment. Check out Kushner Entertainment at KushnerEntertainment.com. We'll catch you next week on The Wedding Biz.